The seventh episode of American Spirits. If I sound somewhat unusual, I apologize, as I am currently suffering from a beastly cold. But nevertheless, we persevere, and to help me do so, I have, as always, Mr. George Bagby. How are you, sir?
I am doing well. I'm pleased to be with you again tonight.
I am particularly pleased to have you. And also joining us is our naval expert, Raging Mandel. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Mr. Bagby, what is all this about Barbary?
So, the Barbary Corsairs, they are the plague of the Mediterranean. And according to some old classic historical interpretations, part of the reason why the Portuguese and the Spanish decided to try crossing the Atlantic to get to the Indies, because ever since the Muslim conquest of North Africa, the bays of North Africa, of Algiers and Tunis and other locales, were or pirating and capturing all the Christian commerce and passenger traffic on the Mediterranean that they could get their hands on. And this, according to some historians, such as uh, a modern writer, Robert Davis, he estimated the total captured uh, captured passengers and sailors on the Mediterranean from the period of the Muslim conquest up until modern times amounted to 1 to 1.25 million captives, most of whom were worked to death in slavery. So they didn't have families, didn't reproduce. This was not uh, a very profitable farming area or anything. They were galley slaves. They were quarry workers. They were sold into sexual slavery and things of that nature. So you don't see the descendants of all of these Christian slaves populating North Africa these days, not surprisingly. Most of them had very short tenures in captivity. But this is also a really uh, an old religious drama in the area. There are a great many saints that are associated with the relief of captives from the Barbary pirates of North Africa. The famous Saint Vincent de Paul of Paris, for instance, he ransomed 1,200 captives who were all taken in slavery by the Barbary pirates. You have other um, remarkable instances of organization in Europe for the relief of Christian captives of the pirates. The Mercedorian order was set up to pool resources and to extend diplomacy with the beys of Algeria and such to ransom Christian captives. Um, Saint John the Merciful of Alexandria, an Orthodox saint that was involved in these sorts of things, is also an instance of that kind of thing. But the American relations with this long and frustrating problem of commerce and passage through the Mediterranean, it begins with the Washington administration. So in 1785, Washington is confronted with the first infraction of the Barbary pirates. They capture two American vessels in 1785. The Algerians do. They get almost $60,000 worth ransom for the American passengers for those vessels. Um, what follows this, uh, let's see, in 1794, we get our very first allotment for building a navy. 6 frigates are authorized by Congress and signed into law by the president. This total budget line is $688,000. If you could just put that in the back of your mind, little over $600,000 as the price for 6 frigates, because this figure is going to come up again, or something comparable to it, very shortly. So this is partly because of the depredations on American commerce in the Mediterranean by the Barbary corsairs, as they're called. In 1795, we have a formal treaty with the Bey of Algiers. This is a really extraordinary thing. They have over 100 American captives at about the time the treaty begins. As negotiations progress, a number of Americans die in slavery in Algeria. We settle for a treaty with the Bey of Algiers in 95. We pay the Bey of Algiers $642,000 to ransom what turns out to be only 83 Americans that are still alive. We continue to supply special provisions, goods, naval stores, and such to the Bey of Algiers for many years afterwards. And some historians tally the total cost of this diplomacy for the United States is over $1 million. Now, if we calculate this stuff down, for 83 captives from the Bey of Algiers, we're paying $7,734 per head. If we take as the calculation to account for inflation, $26.21 per dollar in 1975 dollars, the American government was paying the equivalent of $200,000 per American ransomed from Algiers. So this is a really stupendous sum. And if you remember, the cost of the initial bill to build out the 6 frigates of the United States Navy, $688,000. We're paying in a settlement to ransom Americans from piracy and slavery almost the same amount. So this is comparable in this one treaty.
I'm curious, do you know what Congress had to say about that? Was there sectional opposition to ransoming these sailors from some of the inland areas?
There is an awful lot of frustration about this, and Washington himself is very upset about it, but they have not yet any navy to contend, and this is their only option to get them back. And as we see, even in the course of diplomacy, negotiations for a figure, and the transport of the tribute itself, Americans are dying through the course of the whole thing. They're getting worked to death. So they have a major incentive to conclude negotiations to try to get as many back alive as possible. So
if I may interject here, this is reminding me of a quote, I believe, which is attributed to John Adams, which I think is from a slightly different era. I think it's more associated with the XYZ affair. It goes something like millions for defense, but not 1 cent in tribute. And given this little affair in the Barbary Wars, you can see why such men would say that in later times. And it just looks like it's cheaper to fight when you have the option to fight rather than to simply pay. Because if you pay somebody, paying people the Dane Geld is never going to go well for you, because they'll just come back for more.
yes, indeed. And that was a a popular slogan from the John Adams administration in relation to Barbary diplomacy, and in particular in relation to a specific demand from the Bey of Algiers, which we'll get to. In 1786, we have our first major diplomatic encounter with the Algerians, the Barbary corsairs, these little principalities whose main occupation was piracy. That was the main industry in the area, was plundering the seas. So in 1786, um, you recall in 1785, the first American vessels are captured, the first Americans taken into slavery. In 1786, both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams are both in diplomatic service, and they both happen to be in London at the same time. There they meet with Sidi Haji Abdramahan, who is a representative of the Bay of Algiers. And there are so many different bays of Algiers. I haven't gotten them. I don't have their names in front of me. They change out rather quickly. And there's an awful lot of fighting inside their own families. So you have like
So
the
when you
Ottoman.
say Bay of Algiers, it's BEY you're referring to.
That is correct.
Okay, just
Yes, it's a title. Um, they're also called Dey of Algiers, DEY. We could presumably call them sultans or some such thing. It's a minor official in the Ottoman Empire. So they are technically appendages of the Ottoman Empire, but they are themselves royal families. So they have hereditary titles. There are harems in the Bey's household, and there are typically a great many male claimants to the throne. So whenever a Bey dies, his sons will be in competition with one another to gain the throne, and get control. So there are always a few different claimants to the throne in exile if they manage to escape with their lives. Frequently, they did not. Frequently, they were killed in a post-death intrigue, where the Bey's advisors or something, they league together with one of the sons and manage to kill his brothers, in his quest to gain the throne. So there's an awful lot of confusion about that in the history along the way. But
indeed.
back to
In Constantinople, it was policy for many centuries that when a new sultan ascended, all his brothers would just be killed.
yes, yeah, it was like a mass execution, a very bloody way to hand over political power. So Sidi Haji Abdramahan, he negotiates with none other than Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. This is a very interesting meeting because you have these figures who start out as in the Foreign Service, under the Continental Congress, in fact, and they are heading this particular negotiation. So they start out the conversation, and the Americans are saying, "Why are you in conflict with us? Why are you taking our ships? We have never had any contact with you, good or bad. We don't have any relations with you. In our understanding, when you meet a stranger, you don't just attack them, right? What provocation have we made to make us your victims here?" And the Algerian ambassador answers, and this is a very memorable passage in American diplomacy. He says, "Founded on the laws," well, this is in the words of Adams, presumably, "founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in their Quran that all nations who should not have acknowledged their authority were sinners, and that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners, and that every Mussulman who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. So we see here a kind of war ethic that is analogous to the first caliphs of Islam. So the first four caliphs of Islam preside over the great period of Islamic expansion and conquest after the life of the Prophet. They capture huge territories of the Byzantine Empire. They capture Egypt, they capture Syria, they capture Persia, they go east towards India, and they have a policy very analogous to this. If they aren't Muslims, we capture them, we enslave them. Later on, there is a development of war ethics in Islam. This is not the policy of the Ottoman Empire. Not at this stage of history, not at 1800. Earlier stages, there would be differences. But by the 10th century, Islamic scholars had developed a different theory of the just war than what we see here. So this would be a very early understanding. I want to say primitive, but I mean no slight by saying that. It's very analogous to like the earliest caliphs of Islam. This seems to be how they justified war. This was just intolerable and non-negotiable for Americans. Like, you're just going to attack us because we aren't Muslims. Then there can be no peace with you then. And yet they were able to negotiate these early treaties. But this was very impressive to the American ambassadors at the time. Just to advance, in 1795, we see the treaty with Algiers, which sees this massive payout, which amounts to over $1 million before the First Barbary War breaks out. In 1798, we see the full-fledged creation of a Navy department, which is partly in relation to this, but there are other reasons to have a Navy, obviously. But we have reasons to project power here. This is a really serious expense early in American history. This is equivalent to many millions of dollars in our currency today. So this is a really big amount. This is greater than the original budget of the United States Navy. So it's a major burden. In 1803, or no, in 1800, forgive me, we have the accession of Thomas Jefferson to the White House, and we have one Captain Bainbridge who pays a call to the new president. Bainbridge had been tasked with delivering the annual tribute to the Bey of Algiers. When Bainbridge arrives at Algiers, the Bey comes in under the guns of his land forts there in the harbor. He demands that Bainbridge fly the flag of Algiers from his ship's standard, and take him and some of his servants to Constantinople. Bainbridge says, "Why should I do this? I do not serve you. I serve the United States Navy and the United States government. I'm here on a diplomatic mission," and so on. And the Bey says, "Because I have guns and I can sink your ship and kill you if you do not do as I say." The Bey further says, "You are in effect my slave. you come here to serve me, and so you do my pleasure while you're here. And so talks down to him and humiliates Captain Bainbridge. The Americans figure they have no other choice under the circumstances than to obey the Bey's orders to transport him to Constantinople, and this is all done on the USS George Washington, early Navy vessel. When they get to Constantinople, they have a curious interaction with the officials there, the Ottoman officials, who have never heard of the United States. And so they pass along information about the United States. This is in the New World, the lands discovered by Christopher Columbus. There is a new republic there called the United States. And so they give this information to the Ottomans, and that's all very amusing. But you can see like the humiliating position of the American officials in these circumstances.
Just a piratical anecdote of my own vis-a-vis Captain Bainbridge. My own brother was a merchant mariner, and his ship came under attack by Somali pirates, and he was rescued by none other than the USS Bainbridge.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful. Yes, I'm aware of the Bainbridge class. That is a destroyer class, is it not, Mandrill?
It is.
Well, used to be. There's no Bainbridge destroyer class now. It is the USS Bainbridge, which is an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. I don't remember the side number off the top of my head. Let me look it up real quick.
But there was an older class of destroyer before the Arleigh Burke. That was
yes.
the Bainbridge class.
That's correct, yes.
A Cold War era vessel.
Yeah.
And it was named after this captain.
That's right, yes.
This man has a very illustrious service history, as we will see.
Yes. That's DDG 96 is the current USS Bainbridge. That's the current side number.
So in 1801, there is the Bey of Tripoli cuts down the flag mast or the flag staff at the American consulate of Tripoli, and in effect is at war with the Americans. The Americans respond by sending a squadron into the Mediterranean to blockade Tripoli. And that this is a minor affair. It results in a few armed encounters between these coastal pirate vessels and the squadron of the United States Navy, which is not equipped to chase after these vessels in shallow water, and so they are kind of chasing each other around, but there is never any climax that results from that. But in 1803, this is the colorful instance here in Algeria. Mustafa Baba, who is the current Dey of Algiers or Bey of Algiers, he writes an impertinent letter to Thomas Jefferson. You remember Jefferson is already sending out Navy captains to deliver regular tribute to the Bey of Algiers in exchange for them to lay off American commerce in the Mediterranean, not to capture Americans and enslave them. And Mustafa Baba sends this message to Jefferson. He demands 10 24-pounder guns, 5 18-pounder guns, and 60,000 bricks with which to make furnaces. So he says, do not forget, you've been paying me my tribute all this time, and I trust you'll continue to give me what I want. So we see the ante increases over time. The cost of bribing these people out of enslaving Americans, that cost is growing, and they become more and more impertinent and outrageous. And this finally results in an outbreak of hostilities. In October of 1803, we remember that there's already a squadron in Tripoli that is trying to blockade. In October 31st, 1803, the USS Philadelphia is chasing after a shallow draft ketch, which is a sailing vessel used by the Corsairs that can go into these coastal areas on the coast along North Africa. The Philadelphia is in pursuit of a ketch, and they ground the vessel on an unknown reef. Captain Bainbridge is once again in the theater. He is the captain of the Philadelphia. He's just taken command of the vessel, actually. Bainbridge orders that everything that can possibly be spared be thrown overboard to try to lighten the vessel. It is still stuck fast. They get surrounded by these smaller pirate vessels that threaten to capture the ship. They're attempting to board the Philadelphia. Bainbridge orders that the ship be scuttled. So they pull the caulking out of the hull to allow the hull to flood. But you remember it's also grounded on a shallow reef. So this is kind of hard to accomplish in the circumstance. Bainbridge is captured with almost 300 American sailors on the Philadelphia. The Ottoman, or the I want to call them Ottomans, the Barbary pirates, they managed to save the vessel from actually sinking. They managed to make the hull watertight again. They caulk the hull again. They pump it out, and they refloat it. They actually get it off the reef and return it to Tripoli. In February of 1804, these 300 American sailors are being held captive there in Tripoli. And we see the remarkable adventure of Lieutenant Stephen Decatur of Maryland. Lieutenant Decatur has in his possession, under Commodore Preble of the squadron in the area, they've captured a Barbary ketch, which is this shallow draft sailing vessel, distinctive for a prominent forward mast that leans out at an acute angle off the prow. So it has this large sail that precedes the prow of the vessel. That's what makes this a remarkable, it gives the vessel its specific title. It's a special kind of sailing boat. So they've captured a Barbary pirate ship, basically. They rename it the USS Intrepid, and they keep it in its livery so it continues to look like a Barbary vessel, and it hasn't been widely reported as lost. So Lieutenant Decatur risks tremendous consequence. He is sent in by the Commodore on this special mission. He and his team of crack Marines and sailors, they sail the Intrepid into the harbor of Tripoli. They brought with them a great deal of combustibles. They pull in alongside the captured USS Philadelphia, and they manage to scuttle the ship with fire. So they light the ship on fire. It catches the arsenal of the Philadelphia, and the ship is totally destroyed, taking along with it a number of the Barbary pirates. So this great prize of the Bay of Tripoli is denied him. And Captain Bainbridge is watching in captivity in Tripoli and watches the Philadelphia burn with great satisfaction that the enemy is not going to be able to use this huge capital ship against the American Navy, that the ship has been effectively kept out of enemy hands. Lord Nelson, Horatio Lord Nelson of the British Navy, called this the most bold and daring act of the age, to sail into a harbor with a ship in disguise and manage to destroy a captured vessel of your own fleet in this manner. Do you have any technical aspects that you can add to this, Mr. Mandrel?
Yes, I would say that it's interesting because normally a captain of any ship who happens to find themselves aground can pretty swiftly be expected to be fired from their position without any sort of leeway whatsoever. It's very rare these days when a mistake like that happens that a captain of a ship avoids any censure. So it's very interesting, just in comparison of historical time period, and the men involved with this, that the original captain of the Philadelphia didn't get that kind of censure.
Yes, in fact, he has a reputation of being a heroic figure, like a hero of the Navy.
Indeed, yes, he still has a ship that is named after him to this day.
And he does have a long and distinguished career after this point. Of course, he was in the service before this point, going to Algiers previously. Another curious aspect of the Barbary pirates and the ships they were using, there are a great many references to galleys. Now, Mandrel, can you enlighten me? There are other kinds of galleys other than the kind we see in Ben-Hur, right, where they're all below decks, chained to their oars. And the galley slave is obviously a figure in our imaginations as like a really dreadful way to die, because it's practically a death sentence. It's a death sentence for most everyone that was sentenced to it. But there are other kinds of galleys, right? There are sailing ships that are called galleys. Can you distinguish that for us?
Well, let's see if I'm not mistaken of what you're trying to describe here. A galley is it's still generally used by oars in the classical sense, but by this point in naval warfare, the classical galley, and I think that it's, if I'm not mistaking definitions here, it's a warship that has propulsion through both sail and oars. And by this point, the galley had already been obsolete since the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, which is famous because the Spanish defeated the Ottomans in the Mediterranean using ships that were essentially what we think as the classical ships of the Age of Sail, which is square-rigged, double-masted or triple-masted ships. And the reason why these particular ships were obsolete is because you don't need large crews to man them for rowing. You allow the space. There's this. Let me just to get into nautical terminology here. There's a space from the waterline up to where the main deck is on the ship, and that is the space from the waterline to the main deck is usually called freeboard. And it's a technical term, and that freeboard is generally on the classical Age of Sail ships where the armament of the ship is, the main armament. And so if you're putting oars in the space where the freeboard usually is, you're not really able to have cannons there. and you can't have, and if you do, they're probably not going to be in the freeboard. They're going to be on the main deck, right, which is going to limit the size and also the amount of guns you can actually field. So just on a technical level, that's precisely why galleys are obsolete by this time period.
Interesting. For some reason, I thought that there was another kind of ship that was called a galley that did not have oars.
You might be referring to the Spanish galleon, which is I mean, phonetically similar. Which I don't know the specific definition of what a galleon is. I just know that it's very, very similar to other types of ship in the Age of Sail. It's I think it still has the forecastle and the aft castle, right? If I'm not mistaken, terms there. So it still actually has, like, the forecastle. It is, in classical nautical terminology, it is an actual castle. So when you see ships of the medieval period, you are going to have an actual castle with crenellations. So there's a bit of a transition period, and a galleon still has those.
Okay. So these galleys make appearances in the campaigning around the Barbary coast. And that's a really extraordinary thing, because they are literally propelled by slaves at their oars, and they're driven to extremity. And I suppose they have archers and artillery, maybe even gunpowder weapons, though we also get the impression that the Bey does not have the ability to produce his own, right? He's capturing them in the course of piracy, and he's demanding them as a necessity and tribute, because he is not casting his own cannon.
That's probably correct.
So they might have other kinds of artillery on the galleys. This strikes me as like Roman antiquity. They're fielding galleys with oars full of slaves, and they don't have gunpowder weapons on them necessarily.
By this period, they generally would have a few cannon on them, but the principal advantage of the galley is in Mediterranean waters when it's not particularly stormy, and along the African coastline, which is particularly treacherous. Being able to row yourself around is actually quite an advantage versus being dependent on having the weather gauge and the wind in the correct direction to not, for instance, hit reefs.
Yeah, the draft is incredibly important in littoral warfare, that is to say, the draft of your ship, how deep your ship is in the water physically.
Certainly, as we saw in the case of the Philadelphia, that was a major factor in her capture. So, in February of 1804, we see the destruction of the Philadelphia, the remarkable escape of Lieutenant Decatur, and of course, he gets a major promotion and becomes a hero in his own right after this daring raid. This is part of the Marine Corps hymn, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. This is one of the early missions of the United States Marines. It was as naval infantry engaged at Tripoli in this Jeffersonian campaign. So in June of 1805, we see the conclusion of the Treaty of Tripoli. We see an exchange of prisoners. So we get the return of Captain Bainbridge and the crew of the Philadelphia. In the meantime, the Americans have actually gained more leverage against Tripoli. They have found a claimant to the throne of Tripoli, one of the Bey's brothers, who was in exile in Egypt. So an American consul in Egypt found this guy and had some ideas about how to use him to their advantage in this Tripolitanian War. They hire mercenaries. They put together this crazy outfit of men willing to fight. They hire some Arabic uh, Arabic caravan people with camels and stuff. They go across the Egyptian desert and they take a town on the east of Tripoli, somewhere up there along the coast. So they actually make it to this desert town on the coast of the Mediterranean. They capture the town and they gain a little more leverage this way. They then have a few Tripolitanian prisoners, and they have this town, and they want their sailors back, and so they trade prisoners. They have like 60 Tripolitanian prisoners. The Bay of Tripoli has like 300 American sailors and Captain Bainbridge. And so they make this exchange, and to even it out, because they don't have nearly the same number of prisoners, the Americans throw in another $60,000. And we see the ratification of this treaty in Congress, the Treaty of Tripoli. So that concludes the First Barbary War. So, Mr. Mandrill, can you enlighten us any more about the role of the Navy in this conflict?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I should talk about is the 6 frigates themselves, and the technical construction in these wars, right, and why that is so important. So the 6 frigates are notable because it is the result of a bit of a design compromise. There are 3 essential elements of warship construction, as I've mentioned previously, which are the propulsion element, and then the armament and armor, and then also the space and weight considerations, because those things affect the actual physical dimensions of the ship and also the ship's stability on the ocean, and trying to prevent the ship from rolling over when it takes damage and such, and in high weather. Now, the design compromise for the 6 frigates is to increase the armament whilst not compromising on speed, because these are, of course, frigates. A frigate's main advantage over a ship of the line is its speed. A frigate is outclassed in armament by a battleship, and of course, everybody understands, destroyer, cruiser, battleship in the classic World War II 20th century formulation. It's a bit of a similar deal in the 19th and 17th and 18th centuries as well. The British usually had around 32 to 36 guns on a frigate. What we did with the 6 frigates is to increase the amount of guns and armament from 38 for 3 of the ships to up to 44 for another 3 of them. So, for example, Chesapeake, Congress, and Constellation had 38 guns. Constitution, President, and United States had 44. Now, to do that, the design trade-off is to make the ships a little bit more top-heavy. Which means that if you can just imagine, because you have more guns and there are going to be more guns on the higher decks of the ship, that is going to mean that the ship is more likely to roll with the sway of the sea. It has greater roll. The angle of the roll is going to be greater, right? So it means that you are taking a risk in the ship rolling over or keeling over if you take damage or if you get into a storm. Now, the reason why this is important is you can see with the 3 ships that have the 44 guns, that is a 50% firepower advantage over the comparable British ships of the time.
Indeed, these were super frigates, as it were.
Yes.
They outclassing their major rivals in other navies.
That is correct, yes.
But did they move as quickly?
As far as I'm aware, yes. There was no design compromise for speed, which is why the place where you take the disadvantage is in the stability and in the weight consideration.
It's a remarkable feature. And they did do remarkable service in the War of 1812, where they all saw action and were usually operating independent of one another.
That's right, yes. And of course, these were all in commerce war actions, as we had mentioned last week.
Indeed. Well, in the First Barbary War in 1804 and 1805, Commodore Preble's squadron at Tripoli does bombard the town of Tripoli, and the Bey has insufficient cannon to respond. The Americans outrange the Bey's land-based cannon. So again, we get the impression that the Tripolitanians and Algerians, they don't have the most up-to-date gunpowder technology. They are dependent on capturing weapons. They have older kinds of gunpowder weapons or smaller ones that they got from commercial ships, which were their main targets. With the exception of the USS Philadelphia, they're typically not capturing military vessels. So they don't have the latest kinds of weapons, nor do they have the ability to make them. So this was one of the final great dramas in the battles for Tripoli that subdue the Bey. The Bey actually evacuates his palace while the city is under bombardment and retreats into a fortified area. And this causes great alarm and precipitates him suing for negotiations. Shortly later, we have the outbreak of the War of 1812, where the Algerians demonstrate their support for the British Empire. And they do have periodic arrangements with the British. The British are also paying them tribute from time to time. Occasionally, there is a organization of the British Navy with other European powers to pressure the Algerians into a treaty or arrangement for commerce in the area. So it's not a consistent thing at all, but the Algerians do demonstrate their cooperation with the British in the War of 1812. So James Madison does ask Congress for authorization against Algeria after the declaration of war against Britain. This is not forthcoming for the very simple reason that America has their arms entirely full. They have no resources to send after the Bey of Algiers. But after peace is concluded at Ghent in February of 1815, Congress does authorize actions against Algiers. The Algerians, the Bey and the Barbary pirates, they have taken prizes in the Mediterranean. They have American hostages and so on. After the end of hostilities with the British Empire, we still have our frigates. They have survived the war, some of them with great honors, such as the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides, which is still in the Navy today. You can see it up in Boston, which is its home port. And Mandrill, is the Constitution the oldest sailing ship in active military service?
That's
Does
right.
that
It
sound
is.
right?
That is right. It is the oldest active commission ship at the moment.
I was in
believe-
Boston.
I
Go
believe
ahead.
technically the Victory is in commission.
Oh, wow.
Although
But
it's,
does it still
on
sail?
land. No, it does not.
Yeah.
But it is still officially on the rolls.
Wow. That's pretty cool. I didn't know the status of the Victory, so that's really neat to know. I was in Boston last year and saw the Constitution underway. And it had flags and streamers all over it, and it was quite a sight to behold. It was a very exciting thing to see. But anyway, we had no other occupation for the Navy at that point. So the United States Navy sent 2 squadrons against Algiers. The first was led by the aforementioned Stephen Decatur, the hero of the USS Intrepid, the destroyer of the captured Philadelphia. He is being followed quickly by a second squadron led by none other than Captain Bainbridge. Both of these men come back again for service against the Barbary pirates. Captain Decatur goes after the Bay of Algiers, captures a number of the ketches and the other ships employed by the pirates. They capture upwards of 500 Algerian prisoners in this stage of the war. They are blockading Algiers, and once again we see the incredible mismatch of forces. The Barbary pirates have very small sailing vessels and galleys. The Americans have modern warships that are very recently made, and they also have a fleet full of veteran sailors. These are men that had just been dueling with the British Navy all over the world. So they have thorough experience. They're of the most experienced sailors in the world at the time, and they're going up against these unsubstantial small sailing coastal vessels and such. So they subdue the bay's naval resources and then advance on Algiers. Decatur does not need Bainbridge's support. He actually he wraps up the bay's naval resources before Bainbridge even arrives on the scene. By December of 1815, Decatur reduces the bay to negotiations, and they agree to a prisoner exchange. Once again, the bay does have American sailors, merchants, and passengers from the Mediterranean that he had enslaved, taken into captivity. He releases them, and they exchange their 500 or so captives that they've mostly gotten through capturing and destroying the bay's naval resources. So this is the end of the Second Barbary War in December of 1815. And this is a remarkable achievement because the corsairs of North Africa, they remain a scourge on the Mediterranean until the French capture of Algeria in 1830. So this was a consistent feature in the area, but after the American response at Tripoli in 1805 and at Algiers in 1815, neither one of these Ottoman outposts were deliberately threatening American commercial traffic in the Mediterranean again. We had durable agreements with them after subduing them in war, and they honored our agreements afterwards. What I find very remarkable is the only thing that actually put an end to piracy was European conquest of the area and European enforcement of standards in the area outside of the Ottoman system. So the French conquest of North Africa was what finally put an end to that conflict. Do either of you gentlemen have anything more to add here?
Mandrill, any final thoughts on the role of the Navy in the early United States?
Yes, I think we should probably. I think the battle off of Cape Gata is an interesting little incident as well, just because of the lopsided numbers. So essentially, you had Decatur leading a squadron against a single frigate, which is just like just this an incredibly lopsided engagement, considering the rest of how this war went. Basically, whereas yeah, so it's very interesting that he essentially brought his squadron against the flagship of the Regent of Algiers and basically destroyed it. So that was pretty much, that was after, this was in 1815, so it was well after the War of 1812 had concluded, but that's a very fascinating little incident, and kind of bookends our involvement in the region, at least.
A fitting punctuation to the conflict.
Right.
All right.
Well, I've got something of my perpetual private interest in this matter. This is another occasion to ask the question. Tell me more about what the Marines are for. I understand what the Marines are for in the context of the Barbary Wars. I understand what the Marines are for in the context of the American Civil War. They are naval infantry. They are armed soldiers on board ships who are meant to go ashore when a ship lands in hostile territory and secure a landing to prepare for the arrival of army transports, right? Or to board hostile enemy ships. I don't understand how the Marines end up in Afghanistan. The modern day American Marine Corps just confuses me because I think of the Marines as naval infantry. And when they do things that I imagine just infantry doing, I don't know why they're naval infantry anymore. Could you enlighten me, Mandrill? I'm very thick-headed on the subject and easily confused.
Well, you bring up a good point, because there is I think they would dispute this, of course, the modern Marines would, but there's a bit of confusion as to their modern role, and I think if we were to classify them properly, they are amphibious warfare specialists. That is the residual naval infantry role. So what they are specifically there to do in our force military structure is to perform amphibious landings, either opposed or unopposed, basically.
So how do they end up in the mountains of Afghanistan then?
Well, I have no idea, because they're infantry and they get put into any conflict as infantry.
I know they're spoken of as crack infantry, like crack infantry regiments, the elite infantry sent into the most difficult circumstances and such to establish a bridgehead, presumably for the army, which will follow up behind them. So are they about being the first in to an area, even if it's a landlocked area, there'll be air dropped in there or something? Do the Marines have paratroopers these days?
That is not a question I would know the answer to. I don't believe that they do necessarily. I don't. They certainly don't have any airborne regiments that I'm aware of. They're not like the
I know
81st or the 101st, not like that.
I know we have several Marines associated with us who are all now screaming at me,
And me.
wanting to interject and enlighten me for my thick-headedness. I apologize to all of you. I understand these things much better in a 18th, 19th century context than I do in a modern context. It's just my specialty.
We'll save it for the Chesty Puller episode.
Yes, indeed.
All
I
right.
met Chesty Puller's daughter one day.
Really?
Wow.
How did that
Yes.
come about?
I was visiting a church, and I was just striking up conversation and stuff, and I mentioned something about teaching history, and she said, "Oh, well, I'm Chesty Puller's daughter." And I was astounded. I was like, "Wow, that's incredible. I'm gonna have to remember your face." She was this nice old lady working in an Episcopal church, like the secretary.
Amazing. You never know who you will run into.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Well, we have some super chats, so let's get to those. Eternally Mobile sends us $9.99 with the message, "This is great, guys. Thank you." Thank you, Eternally Mobile, and thank you, guys. It has indeed been great. Bolero393 sends a super chat for $4.99 that I cannot possibly do justice to right now. "From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we will fight our nation's battles from the air, on land, and sea." Bolero393, not content to leave it at that, sends us another $4.99, saying, "Good Tippecanoe Society fact. The Crane Naval Base exists largely to protect the timber necessary to repair the USS Constitution." Oh, amazing. They have
Wow.
the whole facility. One wonders how much of a ship of Theseus we are then dealing with in the USS
Yes, indeed.
Constitution. Yes.
Yeah.
We're probably close to 100% by now.
Oh, no. All right. X Runner. Well, thank you very much, Bolero393. Much appreciated. X Runner 55 sends $5. "The Marines are an attacking force. The Army is now an occupational force. Both can attack." So I guess there's your distinction, Mr. Bagby. Thank you, X Runner 55. And then Bolero393 pesters us yet again with yet more money. For $4.99, he says,
No,
"Eurasia."
no. Please don't send us any more money. Stop sending us money.
"Eurasia, Africa, and every landmass is an island in the eyes of the Marine Corps. They're supporting naval operations all the way inland." Indeed. Thank you, Bolero393, for your customary and much appreciated generosity. All right, that's all for Super Chats. Mandrill, do you have anything you would like to shill before we get out of here?
Yes, I just wrote another article on my Substack that dropped this morning, so go check it out.
Excellent. And Mr. Bagby, what fresh wares have you to hawk for us this week?
I just got several covers in, so I have fun new titles that should be coming out soon. Biographies. I've got a biography of Sam Houston that's on its way that I'm very excited about. I have updates on my website, and we'll soon be announcing a sale. I've figured out how to do a sale on my books, and so go and buy a book right now. But if you wait a short time, then you might have a chance to get some advantages on multiple books in an order. So keep that in mind. I'm going to make it a multiple books thing. Buy 2 books, get both of them 10% off or something like that. I'm going to figure that out here shortly. But you can expect that in the near future. I will be holding a sale, my very first sale.
A buying opportunity without equal in history or myth. All right.
You
well,
can
thank
find my
very-
books at
yes.
tallmenbooks.com.
Mustn't forget that. Tallmenbooks.com. Go there now, buy, then return later and buy at a discount. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, chat. It is, as always, lovely to speak with you and to speak at you.